The stage was sleek, modern, and drenched in spotlights, just the way the World Youth Leadership Forum liked it. Held in Geneva, the event was meant to celebrate the future of global cooperation. But it took just one moment for it to turn into a battlefield of egos. At the center of it all stood Ibrahim Traoré, confident, poised, and wearing a quiet defiance in his eyes. The young leader from Burkina Faso had been invited to deliver a keynote on post-aid sovereignty. But the real heat came from another unexpected presence, Barron Trump, attending in his new role as youth ambassador for American Global Partnerships. Traoré had just concluded a speech that didn't sit well with everyone. True leadership, he said, is not measured by wealth, weapons, or who funds what. It's measured by whether your people still bow, or whether they've finally stood up. The room fell into a tense silence. Cameras clicked. Eyes darted. Then came Barron. With the swagger of someone raised on privilege and applause, he approached the stage under the guise of a follow-up dialogue. Microphone in hand, he tilted his head, smirked, and said, "That was cute, Mr. Traoré. But let's be honest, you're out of your league." A few people in the audience chuckled nervously. Others stared, frozen. Traoré didn't flinch. Instead, he took 2 steps forward, closed the distance between them, and looked Barron dead in the eye. "Maybe," he said calmly, "but I'm not playing your game." The room went quiet again, but this time, it wasn't awkward. It was charged. The kind of silence that precedes a storm. From backstage, organizers whispered to one another. Cameras were suddenly refocused. A confrontation was brewing, and the world was about to watch it unfold in real time. Barron Trump wasn't used to being challenged, certainly not on stage, and definitely not by someone he saw as an outsider. His smirk faded just slightly, but his voice stayed sharp. "Oh, come on," he laughed, feigning charm. "You're talking about independence, but your country's GDP wouldn't fill a Super Bowl halftime budget. If you're not playing our game, Mr. Traoré, what game is it exactly? Monopoly with goats?" A few gasps. Some muted laughter. The kind that's more about tension than humor. Ibrahim didn't blink. He turned slightly toward the audience. "See that?" he said, motioning to Barron without even looking at him. "This is the problem. Not just the arrogance, but the ignorance dressed as intelligence. Measured by dollars, judged by optics, and coated with mockery." Barron shifted his weight, suddenly realizing this wasn't going to be an easy takedown. Traoré walked slowly across the stage, his voice composed but growing louder with each step. "We're not begging anymore. We're building. And when you build your future with your own hands, it doesn't matter who's laughing." The audience, now gripped, stayed silent. Even the moderators didn't dare interrupt. "You can mock our numbers, our struggles, our land," Traoré continued. "But when those numbers turn to ownership, when that land feeds us, and when those struggles become our strength, what will you mock then?" Barron tried to interject. "Look, I respect." Traoré raised a hand. "Respect isn't what you say. It's what you don't say when someone dares to speak without your permission." It hit hard. Because that was the real shift in the room, Traoré had made it clear, he wasn't just a guest on stage. He had taken ownership of it. Backstage, producers whispered frantically. "Keep rolling. This is going viral." Barron Trump adjusted his collar, trying to regain his composure. The applause that had cautiously bubbled after Traoré's last words was now growing. Uneasy, scattered at first, but real. And that stung. He leaned back into the microphone, eyes narrowing. "All right then," he said, voice colder now, "if this is your stage, show us the results. Burkina Faso talks big about standing tall, so where are the investors? Where's the innovation? It's easy to criticize. Harder to lead." Traoré stepped forward slowly. "Let me show you what leadership looks like," he replied. The screen behind them lit up. Without waiting for permission, Traoré had asked the production crew to project real-time satellite imagery, footage of newly irrigated fields in northern Burkina Faso. Rows of crops stretching where there once was drought-stricken dust. These, he said, pointing, were once dead lands. Today, they're growing rice and dignity. Another image, young engineers building water pumps, children in solar-lit classrooms, women leading regional cooperatives. This is the soil of a country that was told to wait. To obey. To beg. We said no. The audience leaned in. Barron's expression was somewhere between disbelief and discomfort. He tried to interrupt again, but Traoré pressed on. You talk about investors? We've stopped waiting for Wall Street to care. We've created our own local funding circles, people investing in themselves. Because we're done trading our futures for press releases and promises that never land. The moderator, sensing a shift in global sympathy, finally spoke. Mr. Trump, do you have a response? Barron smiled stiffly. Sure, he said. This sounds nice. But one good photo doesn't mean you've arrived. America didn't get here by romantic speeches. It took grit, scale, dominance. Exactly, Traoré said. And we're building our own version of that, with less dominance. And more humanity. A soft murmur passed through the crowd. Not applause. Something deeper. Respect. Curiosity. And for the first time, Barron realized this wasn't going the way he expected. Barron Trump straightened his stance, trying to recover the spotlight. You speak well, he said, his tone sharp again, but words don't build economies. America leads because we've earned that position. Through sacrifice, industry, and leadership. You can't just demand a seat at the table, you earn it. That line should have landed. But it didn't. Because Traoré didn't flinch. He didn't rush to answer. He simply let the silence stretch. The kind of silence that makes an audience feel something is shifting. Then came his reply, low, deliberate, and deadly precise. You think leadership is something you inherited, he said. We think it's something you prove, every day, with every brick, every harvest, every child who doesn't go to bed hungry. The crowd went quiet. Traoré took a step closer. You say we haven't earned a seat. But let me ask, how many centuries must one pay to sit at a table their ancestors built and then were banned from? Barron tried to scoff, but the air had changed. No longer was the crowd giving him polite deference. They were locked on Traoré. Listening. Traoré didn't stop. You mistake aid for generosity. We see it as leverage. You call it help. We call it management. And when we choose to feed ourselves, educate ourselves, and fund ourselves, you say we're stepping out of line? He turned to the audience now. We are not asking for permission to stand. We're asking you to move, so we can walk forward. A wave of applause broke out, this time without hesitation. Journalists in the back began typing furiously. Hashtags were already forming. Hashtag #TraorClapback was trending within minutes. Barron stood frozen. He hadn't expected this. He came to outshine. But he'd been eclipsed. And Traoré, without ever raising his voice, had made that happen. Backstage, a Fox News producer whispered, "We might need to cut the feed if this keeps going." But it was too late, clips were already circulating on social media. TikTok edits with captions like, "He just ended Barron's career," and "Traoré didn't come to play," were racking up millions of views. On stage, Barron Trump tried a different strategy. He chuckled dismissively and crossed his arms. So what, you want applause? You want to be congratulated for doing what every country should already be doing? Traoré finally smiled. No, he said, pausing. We want acknowledgement that we were always capable. You just never wanted us to realize it. The room quieted again. Barron replied, capable or not, you still rely on our systems. You trade in our currencies. You bank under our rules. If you're really independent, why are you still playing by our design? Traoré's expression didn't change. His answer was precise. Because we learned how the game works. And now, we're redesigning the board. A short gasp echoed across the studio. Even the moderator leaned in slightly, sensing something historic unfolding. Your world is changing, Traoré continued. And it scares you because power is no longer inherited, it's earned in the open, not behind vaults. And that terrifies dynasties that never learned how to build anything without privilege. Barron tried to counter, that's idealism. In the real world, you need leverage, military, money, influence. Traoré replied, then why are your foundations shaking from a few seeds planted in West Africa? Another ripple of applause. And this time, it was louder. Stronger. Even some of Barron's usual supporters hesitated before clapping. The power balance had shifted, not by force, not by policy, but by the strength of an idea voiced without fear. And Traoré, calm, firm, unshaken, was now the one leading the room. As the debate ended and cameras cut to commercial, the real firestorm began, online. Traoré's calm dismantling of Barron's worldview was now viral on every platform. Instagram Reels titled, When Power Meets Wisdom, spread like wildfire. On X, the hashtag #SitDownBarron surged past trending political topics in under 2 hours. CNN, MSNBC, even international outlets like Al Jazeera and BBC World were already scheduling panel discussions. But the most jarring reaction came from inside Washington. On Capitol Hill, aides were scrambling to draft responses. A senior State Department official texted bluntly, "We underestimated him." Again. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, crowds gathered outside the presidential palace. Not to protest, but to celebrate. A giant screen had been set up in the city center. Traoré's words echoed through loudspeakers. Power is not inherited, it's earned in the open. Parents pointed to the screen, telling their children, that's our president. Inside the debate venue, Barron sat alone in the green room, phone buzzing non-stop, not with praise, but damage control. One of his advisors entered quietly. "Sir," she said, cautiously, "you came in looking to make a statement. But right now, the world's listening to him." Barron looked up slowly, the weight of that truth sinking in. For the first time, he wasn't sure if the Trump name carried the same gravitational force it once had, at least, not in this new global conversation Traoré was shaping. Traoré, meanwhile, stepped out of the building into the evening air. His team tried to rush him into the car, but he paused. There were still reporters lingering. Microphones aimed. "President Traoré," one asked, "do you feel you embarrassed Barron Trump tonight?" He stopped, looked into the lens, and said simply, "I didn't come to embarrass anyone. I came to end a pattern." Then he walked away, without theatrics, without grandstanding. And that calm exit spoke louder than any mic drop ever could. That night, conservative media launched a counteroffensive. Fox News aired a special segment titled, Traoré's Arrogance, a Threat to Western Values? Barron appeared briefly, saying, "I'm not worried." He plays to the crowd, not to results. Let's see where Burkina Faso is in 5 years. But behind closed doors, he was worried. Because polling data showed something no one had expected, Traoré's approval ratings were surging, not just in Africa, but among young Western viewers tired of traditional diplomacy. Many were calling him the voice of the future. Meanwhile, in the White House Situation Room, a classified memo circulated. Traoré's influence is expanding faster than anticipated. Suggest reassessment of current diplomatic posture. Traoré, for his part, wasn't focused on the headlines. He was focused on action. Within 48 hours of the debate, he unveiled a bold new initiative. The Sovereignty Fund. A Pan-African financial instrument designed to support nations reducing dependency on Western institutions. It was backed quietly by 3 African central banks and a growing number of independent investors from the global south. In a press conference, Traoré addressed the skeptics. "We don't want conflict. We want clarity. Clarity that our dignity is not for sale. Clarity that cooperation doesn't mean control." A young reporter asked, "Do you think Barron Trump understands that message?" Traoré replied, "He doesn't have to. But the world will." Back in New York, Barron's team scrambled. His social media feeds were filled with memes of Traoré shutting him down. One clip had over 80 million views. It was now bigger than a moment, it was a movement. His father, Donald Trump, reportedly told an aide, "If he can't beat a farmer from Burkina Faso in a room full of cameras, what makes you think he's ready for the Oval?" Barron heard that secondhand. But it stung. The battle with Traoré was no longer just political. It had become personal. The United Nations held a surprise emergency session on African development aid reform. The reason? Traoré's Sovereignty Fund was gaining traction and influence. Several smaller nations from Latin America and Southeast Asia requested to join the initiative, calling it a blueprint for independence. Meanwhile, in Africa, Traoré was no longer just a president, he was becoming a symbol. In response, Barron Trump requested a televised follow-up debate, publicly challenging Traoré to defend the reality behind the rhetoric. The invitation went viral. But Traoré declined. In a brief but cutting post, he wrote, "I debate to build, not to entertain. If Mr. Trump wants clarity, he can come visit a community project in person. Let's see if he still has something to say after walking the soil." That post alone gained 40 million impressions in 12 hours. But Traoré didn't stop there. He boarded a flight to Nairobi, where he signed a regional trade agreement based on the Sovereignty Fund principles. The pact would allow agricultural products to flow across borders tariff-free, empowering local farmers and shrinking dependency on imports from the West. That same day, Barron posted a video of himself standing in front of a U.S. military base, claiming, "We have the tools, the strength, and the legacy. They just have slogans." But the comparison felt dated. Comment sections were flooded with responses like, "Traoré builds. You pose. One grows crops, the other grows ego." The contrast couldn't be clearer. Traoré was planting ideas, and people were harvesting hope. Meanwhile, a camera crew followed him through rural Mali, where he greeted farmers, engineers, and students. A young girl gave him a drawing, 2 hands shaking, one African, one global. Underneath, she had written, "We want partners, not bosses." He kept that drawing in his briefcase. Because for Traoré, this was never just about beating Barron Trump. It was about changing the conversation, for good. The pressure on Barron Trump was mounting, and it showed. He appeared on a major news program with a forced smile and carefully scripted lines. "Let's be honest," he said, "Burkina Faso is a microplayer. We're the United States. Traoré is performing. I'm preparing." But it wasn't landing. Online, the tide had turned. Public perception painted Barron as insecure, out of touch, and clinging to old power narratives. Satirical shows had a field day. One sketch showed him trying to plant a flag in a rice field, only to be chased off by farmers yelling, "This is Africa now." Meanwhile, Traoré continued to operate on his own terms. He visited a refugee school in Chad, announcing scholarships funded by the Sovereignty Fund. "Our legacy," he said, "is not in what we take, but what we leave behind." At the U.S. Capitol, bipartisan whispers began, maybe Barron wasn't ready. A leaked memo from a Republican strategist said bluntly, "He picked the wrong fight. Traoré doesn't play games. He makes moves." Even prominent conservatives started calling for restraint. But Barron wasn't backing down. He organized a press conference, intending to regain the upper hand. It was flashy, full of flags, advisors in expensive suits, and camera crews poised. Yet as he began to speak, a reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Trump, Traoré just landed in Washington. He's visiting Howard University to speak with students about Afro-global cooperation. Will you be meeting with him?" Barron's mouth opened, and froze. Nobody had told him. Traoré was now on his turf, not asking permission, not waiting for introductions. Just acting. Later that evening, Traoré spoke at Howard to thunderous applause. His closing line echoed far beyond the auditorium. "If they write history with their pens, we will write it with our actions." That moment sealed it. Barron Trump wasn't just losing a debate. He was losing the narrative. The night before Traoré was scheduled to leave Washington, an unannounced guest arrived at the Burkinabe ambassador's residence. It was Barron Trump. No cameras. No press. Just a quiet entrance through a side door. He requested a private meeting. Traoré agreed, but with one condition. No speeches. Just truth. Inside, the tension was electric. Barron sat stiffly, arms crossed. Traoré leaned back, composed but unshaken. "You humiliated me," Barron began. "No," Traoré replied evenly. "You did that to yourself. I only told the truth." Barron hesitated. Then his voice dropped. "I grew up thinking leadership meant dominance. You made me question that." Traoré studied him for a moment. "Leadership is not a crown, Barron. It's a mirror. If you can't face what's reflected, you're not ready." Silence. Finally, Barron stood. "So what now?" Traoré walked to the window, looking out over the lights of D.C. "You have a choice. Use your name to protect the old world. Or use your voice to help build a new one." That line would later be quoted in editorials, campaign ads, and international speeches. But in that moment, it wasn't theater. It was a challenge. The next day, Traoré gave a final address at the National Press Club. No fanfare, just words that rang like iron. "We came not to beg, but to build. We didn't bring hands outstretched. We brought tools. And we will use them, with or without applause." The audience, journalists and diplomats alike, stood in silent respect. Backstage, as Traoré prepared to leave, a staffer handed him a note. From Barron. It read, "You win. Not because you're louder. Because you're clearer. I still have much to learn." Traoré smiled faintly, folded the note, and placed it next to the drawing the girl in Mali had given him weeks earlier. Some battles aren't about who speaks the most. They're about who listens best. In a world that often confuses volume with vision, one man stood his ground, not with arrogance, but with clarity. While others postured, he built. While others debated, he delivered. Ibrahim Traoré didn't come to the global stage to ask for permission. He came to remind the world that dignity is not given, it's reclaimed. Barron Trump tried to measure strength by legacy. But Traoré showed that true leadership is measured by purpose. And in the clash between inheritance and integrity, it wasn't the name that echoed, it was the truth. This wasn't just a political moment. It was a generational shift. Because sometimes, the quietest man in the room says the loudest thing. And the world listens.